Okay, this is a really good question, and I don't have a wonderful answer. I'll be honest, but it is a really good question. It says, I understand being able to acknowledge the state you're in and allowing it without self judgment slash self criticism. So my question is, when I'm in shutdown or freeze slash flight, I go, I can't yell it because it's on all capitals. I want to yell it. I could, but I don't want to yell it. Brain dead, and kick into deep survival mode. How can I shift into that acknowledging my state? Oh, how can I shift that into acknowledging my state? Oh, so go from deep survival mode into acknowledging my state and possibly helping myself move up the ladder. We'll stop there. I'll address that first. It's not easy, and it requires a really strong vagal brake, which is the capacity to handle defensive states. So, I mean, like with the coping skills and anchoring yourself in safety is useful for when you can do it. There is such a thing as like going too deep into the defensive energy, and then it really like your existence flight fight state. So you want to do the anchoring and coping skills before you need them, like well before you. We want to be able to recognize like, oh, there's an issue here building within me, or there's some defensive energy building within me that's about to get out of control. And now is when I want to do my anchoring, my coping. We want to do this beforehand. Like that's really the ideal. That's the ideal, and that's not the question. The question is, how do you do it when you're that deep into it? And honestly, I don't know. I don't have a great answer. I the students will come to me when, like in school, this has been happening this year, has been kicking my butt, but it's been happening a lot recently, where there's a student, like a client, a student I'm working with, who is in school, in class, and all of a sudden a panic attack hits, or a rage, like an anger, and they're aware enough to say, I need help. And so they can't deal with it, they can't cope, they can't anchor themselves in safety in that moment, but they can go to somebody else for help. They can come to me, to my office, and hopefully I'm there on that day. And so they come to me and they can express like, look, I'm having a panic attack, and they basically are too far gone to like feel it and anchor themselves in safety, but they're present enough to say I need help. And so they'll come to me and they'll sit down and they'll basically, I've seen kids just, they have their panic attack. They tense up, and I'm just kind of there with them. So they're at least they're in a place where it's safe. But that's before, I mean, that's at least they have some level of awareness to be able to recognize that's what they need. And so they seek a safe space and a safe person, which is me in my therapy office at that school. So they're not really grounding themselves exactly. They're not really anchoring, they're not coping, but they're minimizing the damage, maybe the risk of hurting someone else through a rage, or embarrassing themselves in class during a panic attack. They're just sort of mitigating the potential fallout. It's not a great answer, but that's kind of it. So if you're deep in a panic attack and it's like it's just going to happen, or a rage or whatever it is, yeah, how do you minimize the risk of that? I think I've shared, like, I have problems with panic attacks when it comes to heights, especially mostly when I'm driving around heights. And it's pretty intense, and it's something that, I wish I had more of a handle on, but I truly get into these like panic attacks when I'm up high, when I'm in the car driving. And there's been times where it's like it's just going to happen, and it's super dangerous because I'm driving, but there's this damn bridge I have to go over. And so I found ways that I wouldn't say I'm really anchored strongly in safety, but I'm just sort of dealing with, like, let me just minimize the risk here. And so for me in those situations, talking out loud helps, and just sort of narrating what's happening. If my wife is there, like holding her hand helps me out. Like it gets really intense. I have a serious issue with heights. So it's not really like I feel safe, I'm grounded, but I'm like, I'm just dealing with it enough to be able to get through this situation. So I don't think that's a great answer. Yeah, having the co-regulator is something. So if you can't regulate within yourself, or can't regulate enough, having a safe co-regulator can help. And that for me as as myself as a therapist for somebody else, or holding my wife's hand when I'm having a panic attack in the car. That's co-regulation, and so it helps. It doesn't solve the problem, but it might make it more tolerable, more bearable. Yeah, so it's not a great answer. I don't have a fantastic answer. It's all the good answers happen before there is a huge crisis. Once you're in the moment of crisis, hopefully we are enough anchored to be able to just reduce the potential of that crisis to get worse. Like that's I feel like that's kind of the what else can we do? What could help though is if you're in a space where like it's gonna happen. I guess not fighting it and saying like, "Hey, I'm gonna have a panic attack. It's gonna happen. Let's do it." That might be more helpful than trying to fight it or saying, "Let's do it," but I'm gonna go in bed or I'm gonna have a panic here where it's safe in this space. Like I'm just gonna feel this stuff and like, okay, fine, let's do it. Maybe that could be helpful, or at least not help. Maybe not helpful, but less painful, less problematic. Could an item be a co-regulator? Yeah. Oh, so I'm sorry, I got off track. So maybe you say this is just going to happen, and I don't have somebody with me, but maybe I do have a thing that is helpful, and that could be an item. Thank you for that, Emma. But it could also be somebody's voice that feels soothing to you. So there might be a meditation podcast. There might be someone's YouTube channel that you don't know the person, you're not with them, but there is something about that is soothing to you. A lot of people fall asleep. It's not a panic attack. Well, a lot of people who have a lot of high anxiety, they'll fall asleep listening to something that's just kind of soothing. So that's better than nothing. So if you know you're about to have a panic attack, maybe you can put on music or a voice or background noise that might reduce the intensity of the panic attack or make it more tolerable. You might have a visual anchor, just something to stare at, something to look at to help you get through it. Maybe it's a pleasant or pleasing enough shape or image or whatever it is. Like maybe that could help you. If you're in the throes of a deep panic attack, maybe you do have a physical thing that you can grasp onto and actually utilize the energy. That could be helpful. When I'm in the car having and my panic attack starts, I find myself gripping the steering wheel pretty tightly. And so having something to grab onto is helpful for me. Doesn't solve the problem, but it's like at least I can use my muscles and I can, tense up and feel this while being safe and driving. So yeah, that can totally apply, at home, and ideally it's at home to where you're feeling the panic attack stuff and like it's just going to happen. So let's feel it. But there might be ways to reduce it, and so having a way to channel that energy into an object, a fidget, not a fidget, but like something you could strangle, that could be helpful. Maybe there's a certain texture or a blanket that's soft that just kind of like it doesn't solve the problem, but it can help me get through this situation. Could an item be a co-regulator? I definitely think so. It's more so that would be it's not a co-regulator. It would be more of a self-regulator. It's a safety anchor. It's something that can help to reduce the intensity of what you're going through. So having a some sort of plan ahead of time, my students know they can come to me as a way to reduce the potential of how bad it could get. I'm sorry to use the word bad, but it's not pleasant. Yeah, having things ahead of time. I find that with when students are in panic attacks, I have some they're fake, but I have these, what do you call them, topiaries, like fake plants, or one or two in my office at a certain school, and having that in front of them, and it's this very pleasant green. It's a spherical shape, so having that in front of them to look at as they're in, like just to have something to focus on, can be helpful. Doesn't solve the problem, but it can be helpful. Having fidgets in the room, even when like having a fidget, like there is a certain point where like you're just too far gone for that to really help much. And so, like the earlier we catch this, obviously, the better. Yeah, when we ignore these things early on, as we notice them, it kind of like builds up. Yeah, it doesn't really help. Maybe in that moment it does, but it gets worse later on. So, how can I shift into acknowledging my state and possibly helping myself move up the ladder? I guess once it passes, that's it's hard to notice your state when you're dysregulated. Noticing your state is helpful for when you're regulated enough. Once you're dysregulated, it's really hard to have that top-down awareness and curiosity, because noticing your state requires a level of curiosity and introspection and openness. And once you lose access to that, it's really hard. Like it's kind of not possible, maybe even. I don't know if that's extreme, but may not be possible to notice what state you're in. But even if you did notice what state you're in, if you're in a really dysregulated state and you notice that you're in a flight, panicky flight energy, but it's not necessarily helpful, because if you're in a dysregulated place, story follows state. So you'll start to like say how stupid you are. I shouldn't do this, and I should know better. Like when I have a panic attack in a car, I'm like, I'm a therapist. I talk about this stuff, and I know well where I'm at, but my thoughts become like, why can't, dude? You shouldn't be doing this. You know, my thoughts change. So even though I have awareness of it, it doesn't really. It can be helpful if you're anchored enough, but it also, if you're not anchored enough, then it just becomes this very evaluative, critical, self-critical, self-blaming, self-judgmentalizing some thing that we do, right? And yeah, we have to have enough safety, enough anchoring. The vagal brake has to be active enough for that introspection to be helpful. I also think trying to meet yourself with a lot more kindness during these moments is a skill I've been working on. But that comes from having that safety stuff active, being anchored enough. If you're anchored enough, then kindness comes along with it. Story follows state, and being aware of and feeling your stuff from a platform of safety is a lot more helpful, right? I start noticing the words of the story. There you go. I'm telling myself, and try to identify when I'm being judgmental. We all suffer, indeed. This response is protective, and we should all try to meet the moments with a lot more grace. I think it's been a really important starting point for me. Yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree with you. But the mechanics of it is like, well, how do we make sure that we are anchored enough to, to safety in order to execute all the kindness and grace and whatnot? And so I think what can help is to overall reduce the level of judgment. What can help with that is, before the fact, learning what's happening within you, learning what different states feel like for you, and coming from a platform of curiosity for the self, that could help overall. I mean, just overall, that's very broad level outside of a panic attack. What could help is building up the capacity to feel safe in general. What could help is to expose yourself to these moments of panic, to these moments, not full on panic, but just elements of the panic. So for me, like, I know that driving over a certain bridge or bridges is a huge trigger for me. I cannot, well, I can handle it, but it's not safe. So I either avoid them completely, or if I'm with someone, I'm say, oh, with my wife, with my wife. See, I'm getting sympathetically driven just thinking about it. When I'm with my wife, I'll ask her like, "Hey, I can't, I'm not in a space to handle this. Do you mind driving over this?" So, but while she does that, I still feel the activation, but now I'm not driving. So now I'm more in a place to like handle it, to feel it, to notice it. And so I'll do things that make myself feel uncomfortable, like looking out the window, looking over the edge. And I still feel a bit of that panic energy, but I'm able to tolerate it and notice it. And doing that, I'm noticing is helping me to build a tolerance for later on. I think that helps. So exposing yourself to pieces of, not all of it, but pieces of um, what triggers you. And that might be through imagination, that might be directly, whatever it is. That could help along with building the tolerance to be anchored in your vagal brake or in your safety state. Doing both of those together, plus learning about all these things to help reduce judgment. I think those are pieces of all this.